Humanity Matters.
Jonny, thank you so much for being the very first interview here at HMTV. We so very much appreciate it and are looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you for having me. You know, honestly, I was blown away by this studio, and what an appropriate title to have, Humanity Matters. And I think that this kind of embodies, more than anything, the work that you guys do here is showing the humanity and explain that to people. So it's an absolute honor to be your first guest. Thank you very, very much for having me.
It really is our privilege and pleasure. And, you know, because humanity matters, I want to talk about some of your personal humanity. So if you don't mind, let's talk about your grandfather, your history, his history in Poland.
So should we do it as my great-grandfather?
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me about your great-grandfather.
So my great-grandfather was born in, well, actually it's even more interesting than that.
Okay.
So my great-great-grandparents were from a small town in Poland called Dobrze nad Wisłą. Dobrze nad Wisłą is on the Wisła, so if you followed the Wisła River all the way from Warsaw up, about 2 hours north, you're going to get to this small little town. And my great-great-grandparents lived there for many, many years. They had a little bakery in the town, and at the end of the 1900s, they were having a pretty hard time. It was not a good time to be Jewish in Poland, and they decided to try their luck and leave and go towards the United Kingdom and see what could be waiting for them there. And so they came over to London, and this was the time of the Industrial Revolution, right? So it's not London of today, you know, that was like the smog and like the dirt streets and like all those like...
Industrial Revolution.
Like awful time. So they came to London, and they were only in London for about 3 or 4 years. But when in London, they gave birth to a little boy. That little boy was my great-grandfather, David Rutter. And they ended up going back to Poland, to their shtetl, to their village. It was too difficult in the UK. They went back to London, had a bunch more kids, and were living somewhat a normal life in that town. They're a very poor family. These were these small towns, you know, this image of these pre-war Jews as rich, you know, this was more like Fiddler on the Roof, right?
It was all Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah, so these were not wealthy people at all. And they were struggling. And in the interwar period was when you saw a tremendous amount, like a huge outburst of anti-Semitism in Poland, a tremendous amount. And the Russians had come in at that time and were conscripting Poles to the Russian army. Now, you know, we would have heard all the stories, right, of someone's uncle who would have got conscripted and never came back. The conscription was meant to be for 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years. You basically disappeared. He, however, had his golden ticket, which was his British passport. He was born in the UK. So he packed his bags and fled and went to London. In London, he carried on doing whatever he knew what to do, and his family were bakers, and he worked as a baker. In fact, he worked his way up to be the head of the smallest union in the United Kingdom, which was the Kosher Bakers Union. There are like 30 members. There's even articles in the press. He got in a fight with another member. He gave him a black eye. It was all in the newspapers. And then when the Second World War hit, and the understanding of what was going on, the depth of the Holocaust really hit home, it's when he started to attempt to bring his family out. And he tried to get a little bit of money together. Even in the UK as a baker, didn't have real money. And really wanted to bring his siblings and was unable to do so. And never spoke about it since then. Every single one of his brothers and sisters and parents and uncles and aunts, the entire village were murdered. Everyone. And it's amazing. You know, I've been doing this, working in the field of Holocaust education for 11 years now. Right, I've been to Poland, I speak a bit of Polish, I've done everything you can imagine. I found out so much of everybody else's family's history. I don't even know where my family were killed. There's no information. The likeliness is probably Helmno. And I grew up with that history of my great-grandfather. My grandmother, his only daughter, is the person who's closest to me in the whole world. My grandmother is definitely going to be watching this podcast. She watches everything I do. She's my biggest fan. Even if it's going to be really bad, I know she's going to tell me it was really good. And I grew up with my grandmother and learning about her father and understanding the connection to this past. And I think that's probably what spurred my humanity more than anything else. It was my grandmother.
So you grew up in a part of London, North London,
Yep.
correct? So in that environment, you were very much exposed to your grandparents. And your grandmother, it appears, was a very important influence to your life. So tell me, though, you're a British kid from a Jewish kid in North London. And how do you go from there, that I believe you were a teenager and decided to make Aliyah and become a paratrooper in the IDF? How do you go from that kid to that point?
From a young age, I mean, it was actually with my grandparents and with that grandma. I was walking, we'd gone on holiday to Israel. I was 7 years old. And I remember walking down Bograshov Street in Tel Aviv, walking down the beach, to the beach. And I was walking down, I was holding my grandma's hand. And I said, Grandma, I said, I want to live here when I'm older. And she said, okay. She said, remind me in 10 years' time. And when I was 17, I said, Grandma, do you remember that conversation? She said, I do. I said, well, it's still applicable. You know, growing up in a Zionistic environment, which I did with, you know, Bnei Akiva and a Jewish school, it just made no sense to me that as Jews we could pray to Jerusalem and not go and live in Jerusalem, right? How we could have a connection to this Holy Land and not want to be there. Now, you know, my grandfather, my grandmother's husband, he was actually born in Australia, but his parents were born in Israel. And my family from that side go back 8, 9, 10 generations in Tzfat in northern Israel. And I'd always very much felt this connection to Israel. And so when I was 18, as soon as I finished high school, I was like, see you later. You know, I went and pretended to be in yeshiva for a year. I wasn't a very good student.
I spent a year in yeshiva in Israel.
Pretending as well?
I wasn't pretending.
No, you really?
I was there. Yeah.
Good for you. I was pretending big time. I was doing everything but. And during my time in yeshiva, I volunteered with an organization called Zichron Menachem, which is the most unbelievable organization that supports children with cancer inside of hospitals in Israel, in Jerusalem mainly, where I volunteered. And there I became very close to the other Israelis who were all my age, about to go into the army. And it was like, you know, their blood is no redder than mine. How could I not join? And even from a young age, I felt like the army was something that I wanted to do. And so that's how I signed up for the army. And in fact, you know, even with my signing up to the army, Holocaust survivors played an impact in that. My level of fitness prior to the army, I mean, the furthest I'd run was for the bus, right? You know, I was like, I played a bit of soccer growing up, right? Like a Jewish boy in Northwest London. You know, I get to the army and all these other boys have been planning and preparing for it. And I'm like, oh, goodness. And so a few weeks before I was due to go back and sign up, I went back to London to be with my family. And I remember going to shul on Shabbat in the morning. And I was walking back and I bumped into this elderly man. He was kind of standing outside and was holding this piece of paper. And I stopped and said, are you okay? Anything I can do to help? And he says, oh, this is my address. Please just point me in the right direction. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that, right? So I take him and I hold him hand by hand because he's walking a bit funny. And I start walking him home. And you know, after 30 seconds, you can hear this heavy Eastern European accent and this pronounced limp. I'm like, he's got a story to tell.
Right.
So I said, you know, please tell me your story. And you know, he kind of shuffled around a little bit, and you know, I pushed him a little bit more, and he said, okay, listen. He said, look, I was born in a small town in Poland, and when the German Nazis invaded, my family were rounded up. We were sent to a ghetto, and from the ghetto, we were eventually put on a train and sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And when we got off the train in Birkenau, we were all had to stand in a long line. Right. And I was standing there with my twin brother. And when we got up to Dr. Mengele, he looked at me and my brother, and he said, "You two, you're coming with me." And he said we were experimented on for about 2 years.
Because they were twins.
Because they were twins.
Yeah.
You know, Dr. Mengele.
My mother was presented to Mengele.
Ugh.
Yeah.
You know,
she got lucky.
I mean, you know, this guy was telling me the some of the things that they went through, which was just unbelievably horrendous. You know, this evil man who performed medical experimentations on Jews inside of Auschwitz. Birkenau was just beyond evil. You know, right. the stuff that they do, and you know, how long can people survive underwater before drowning? How, you know, awful things. And so these two brothers, amongst other things, were injected with different kinds of liquids into their legs to see how it would work. And he was injected with a kind of liquid metal into his leg, which is what gave him this pronounced limp. His brother wasn't and didn't have the limp. Anyway, somehow, he says to me, somehow we both survived. The war finishes, we go back to Ostetl, to our village.
Right.
Everyone's gone. There's no one left. What do we do?
Right.
There's nowhere to go. Right, the communism's in Poland. The Poles don't want us. Right, we've got to get out of here. So they get on a boat towards the land of Israel, towards what was then known as Palestine.
Yeah.
They get there. The Brits, the nice Brits, say, "Nah, you ain't coming in."
Right.
Ship them straight off to Cyprus to an internment
That's
camp.
where they all went. Yep.
And eventually, when the state of Israel was declared, they were on one of the first ships into the ports of Haifa, and they got off the ship, both late teens. What were we going to do? So they both went to enlist for the army, and they went in together. They'd done everything together, and they go up to the officer. He looks them up and down, and he says, "He says, you're not useful for much, right? With your leg, right? You can go and help pack bags, right? So, but you're in good shape. You're joining this division."
Right.
And he was put in the division that was fighting for the liberation of Jerusalem. And he fought in the Independence War, in the War of Independence for the State of Israel. And he said to me, "Johnny," he said, "the day before the liberation, the day before the end of the war, my brother died fighting in Latrun in the battle over Jerusalem." He said, "But I promise you something. He died with a smile on his face, and he died proud
and free.
And free, knowing that he was fighting for the Jewish people." And I'm listening to this.
Right, as an 18-year-old.
As an 18-year-old, weeks before I'm about to go to the army. And I'm like, if there's no more of a sign for me of what I'm really doing here, and this kind of incredible guidance that's come out of nowhere, I don't know what more there could be. Right. So when I'd gone into the army, they take the lone soldiers, which I was, and they put you in this base up north. You're there for X amount of time, depending on how good your Hebrew is. It's kind of a base that will introduce you to basic army slang and army words and teach you, because you've not grown up with it, you're not going to know. So to get you on the same level, so you're there for 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months. I was there for 3 weeks, and it was awful. It's all like all the.
Well, there's an adjustment.
It's more than adjustment. Also, all the officers are like kind of the loser officers who can't get a job anywhere else. They ship them off there. So like, these power tripping and like it was tricky. It was hard. And they'd come one day and they said, "Look, there is the kind of initiation and opportunity to join the paratroopers, and it's like a 2-day." I mean, the best example you give here and say it's like, you seen the movie Jarhead?
Yes.
When they're like all that awful stuff, they're like, it's that for 2 days. But if you go on it, then you're out the base for 2 days. It will give you a day off for the third. Who wants to go? I was like, well, I'm out. I'll go. I'll give it a try. And they laughed. They're like, you got no chance. I was like, we'll see. So I get there and I'm looking around and everyone's like fit as a fiddle and really in shape. And it starts. And it starts with sandbags. Right, so you got to grab a sandbag, run 100 meters, empty it out, run back, fill it up, and you're doing this maybe an hour.
Right.
Then, all right, bring all the sand back the other way. Just pointless, mundane, tiring tasks.
Test of will.
Correct. After about half an hour, everyone's the same level of tired. You realize this has absolutely nothing to do with physical ability. Well, a little to do with physical ability, but much more to do with mental capabilities and stamina. All I had in my mind was that man. And I got through it, one of, I think, 8 out of 200. And I was accepted into the paratroopers. And that's kind of how my army service started, with, again, from the influence of survivors.
To have that sheer will to go through. And you spent 3 years as a paratrooper?
I did. I spent 3 years in the army. The army is an experience that, especially in Israel, it gives you complete entry to Israeli society.
Right.
Right? Like, the mentality of an Israeli is different to almost anything. There is a difficulty and a strength that comes through something like that. And the army is not an easy place. Right?
Right.
Like, not even, again, it's not just the physicality of it. It's the mental and the trickiness and, you know, dealing with different peoples. And it was hard. It was a real slog. But
And the state of mind of how they wanted you to break you down and then build you up in the image of success that they are looking for.
correct. You gain a tremendous amount of getting through that.
Right.
Right? Like, I look at a lot of young people here in America, and I'm
Yeah.
like, it would be a good idea for them to go through something like that. Because it does turn you from an idiot boy
Into a man.
Well, an idiot man, but you're still a man, right?
Right.
Like, it definitely gives you a level of understanding about life, really. Like, life isn't going to be easy.
Right.
There are going to be challenges and difficulties. If you want to fight, you're going to be all right, and you're going to get through it.
Right. And most people, at least, you know, we are very blessed with whatever challenges that we have in America, and even as Jews in America in this very unique time. We're incredibly blessed, and we don't always realize how blessed we are. So in some ways, it's an incredible blessing to have this opportunity to grow up and understand the world at an age when your peers, especially those back in North London, don't quite get it yet. You grow up a little faster.
You got very fast. I mean, I think generally growing up in Israel, you grow up faster. You know,
Yeah.
this summer I had an incredible opportunity. I was with my kids and my girlfriend's kids. I have 2 beautiful daughters, and my girlfriend has 2 beautiful daughters, and they're roughly the same age, teenage girls, which is a whole headache in itself.
I have a lot of experience on
Oh,
that
brother.
topic.
Oh, well, that's a whole other podcast.
That's about 10 podcasts.
Yeah.
can do
And
a
a
whole
lot
series.
of therapy and crying and everything.
Yeah.
But 4 teenage girls. And they're amazing girls, each in their own right. Successful, brilliant girls. Every single one of them. But they're wildly different.
Yeah.
Wildly different. There's, you know, growing up in Israel, and I see this from my kids. Like, I remember Michali, my oldest, maybe she was in kindergarten, and I'd been in the army, and I'd come out, and you know, I was a tough guy and all of this stuff, and my daughter's in kindergarten, and I think it was Oferet Yitzukah, and they were shooting missiles from Gaza towards central Israel. And I was at home, and there were missiles being shot towards central Israel. And I remember standing on my balcony, just shaking. I was in tears. I didn't know what to do with myself. Like, my daughter was like, you know, and from that age, she's already like, Abba, Dad, like, what does this mean? Why do they hate us? Why is this? Why is there that? And so you grow up with a different kind of growing up. And
Right.
there's
And it's
a
tough
difference.
questions to answer. It's an adult topic that a kid has to confront and understand, you know, that for every one beautiful child like your daughter, there's 40 people surrounding her country that want her dead.
Yeah. And that's a mad thing to think about. And, you know, you have to have these conversations with kids in Israel.
Right.
Because you got no choice, and especially after October 7th. I mean, American Jews and Jews in diaspora also saw more of that and having to answer these questions. You know, and here you can still, you know, maneuver around it a little bit. You don't really have to discuss it. You can keep away from it. But in Israel, there's no chance.
Right.
There's no chance. Like, even as a kid, like, I mean, I must have been in primary school. It's one of my only memories really of like being that age was the Gulf War. and Jewish institutions being targeted potentially in the UK. And I remember as how old must have been 5 or 6 years old or something, and the teacher telling us we have to get under the desk. She's going to sit by the door if the alarms go off, and you're like, what on earth? Like,
what's going on?
Why are they trying to get us? Right? Like, what have we done wrong? And in Israel, kids get that slightly differently. You know, after October 7th, before I traveled, the first time I left Israel after October 7th to travel to the States to speak, my eldest said to me, she said, Abba, she said, do you remember that picture you took of me last year? I was like, what one? I've got like a gazillion pictures.
Right.
Every minute I'm like that. Right. She says, you know, that one. She explained to me. I was like, yeah, okay, I remember.
Right.
She was like, well, look, if I get taken hostage,
that's the one I want.
That's the picture I want pictures to see.
And then you say, that could be my kid.
And then, yeah, I mean,
every one of those kids could be your kid.
And that wiped me out. And then she said, and listen, if I do get taken captive and then make a video, if I go like this, it means that I'm lying and I was forced to say this.
Wow.
Which showed that she'd been thinking about this.
Right.
And I had to sit with her and, you know, tell her the best that I could that, you know, Michali, everything's going to be okay, right? There's nothing to worry about. You're safe where you are. Don't worry. But these are conversations. And
they're real conversations.
Oh, yeah.
You might not need to worry this second, but you do need to think about it.
100%. You know, after October 7th, I was in London and at Friends on a Friday night, just as we were recently.
Right.
And they had young kids, and so did their friends. And the young kids left the room after the meal, and they turned around to me and they said, Johnny, when do you think we need to leave? And again, I was shocked. And I said to them, I said, you know what? I said, the first thing you got to recognize, this is the oldest conversation that Jewish people have had.
Yep.
We're having the same conversation that our grandparents and great-grandparents and for thousands of years we've been having.
Oh, listen, I mean, my parents, I grow up with 2 children that are, you know, my parents were complete survivors. They lived through it in the worst possible way. And then they came to America. There's a whole story there, but they found great success with family, with friends, and financially. And I will never forget my mother, who I lost a few years ago, when she was, you know, at really the end of her life, you know, just as she was still lucid, she ended up passing away from Alzheimer's and the effects of it. But there she was, and I found this huge sack of money in the house. And I go, Mom, what are you doing with this huge amount of cash? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And then she took a moment like I was 12 and she was going to teach me a lesson. And she says, you know, you see this beautiful house? You see our beautiful business? You see our beautiful cars? You see all my jewelry? You see our businesses? I'm out of here in 24 hours when I see them coming. I will not hesitate to leave. And that's still that mentality.
Right.
But the mentality that you have as someone who stood up, joined the paratroopers, made Aliyah, sitting there with your daughter, talking about what it could be for her if she's kidnapped, if she's in this position, like so many other peers that just went to a peace concert, is we don't want to run anymore.
Right.
That's a different philosophy for us.
Right.
And you've lived a life to say, you know, we're here to love the world, but we're not running.
And, you know, I think that for me, you know, I visited last week. They invited me to visit the Anne Frank house museum thing that they built in New York City.
Tremendous exhibit, and Michael Glickman, who's part of us here, had a lot to do with it.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was there, and they'd had a bunch of American influencers speaking there before, and they were talking about this and having to hide and all of this stuff. And I was standing there as an Israeli Jew.
Yeah.
And I was like, you all got this wrong, right? I was like, you've really all got this wrong. I was like, you know, I said, this isn't 80 years ago today. I said, you know, thank God we're in a different place. You know,
Right.
God forbid if stuff got bad anywhere. And you look, like, stuff is getting bad. Like, it's not a joke in Australia. It's
Right.
not a joke in Canada.
Right.
Right? You know, if another few years of poor government control, Jews are going to have a major, major issue. And I've spoken to Jews in both countries who are already looking for a way out, who have already got those bags and getting them ready, right?
Right.
And in a situation like that, the difference is, thank God we're not at the beck and call of anybody today.
Because today we have Israel.
Today we have Israel. And that gives a power to Jewish people that
Haven't
we've
had
never
for
had.
millennia.
And this is what enables us to stand tall and strong,
Yeah.
right? Come for me all you want, right? What's the worst you're going to do, right? Things get real bad. I'm going home.
Aliyah.
Exactly. I'm going home.